There's a category of roads you won't find in engineering textbooks, one you won't believe exists. This isn't because engineering is unknown. The roads in this category weren't built according to engineering textbooks. They were built with existing resources. However, the road in sixth place was built with resources beyond what is available. Such a place shouldn't exist in this world. These are roads that other road networks do not recognize. They do not appear on highway maps. On these roads, there are no service areas, speed limits, or consistent surfaces that indicate someone is responsible for what happens on them. Only essential traffic moves on these roads. Trucks carrying copper from mines that cannot be closed. Motorcycles carrying 700 liters of fuel because the refinery is in Thessaly. Buses carrying hundreds of people who understand, without needing to be told, that this journey is a negotiation with terrain that offers no other options and will not allow them to pass. The roads on this list are something different. They are roads where the danger is not a feature of exceptional geography. But a feature of the ordinary conditions, of roads that have never been adequate for the traffic they carry, in places where the resources to make them adequate have never existed, and where the people who use them every day are not doing so because they chose the thrill of a difficult drive, but because this road, in this condition, with this surface and these stakes, is the only way between where they are and where they need to be. That distinction matters. It changes what you are watching when you watch these roads. You are not watching drivers test themselves against a mountain. You are watching communities maintain their connection to the world through whatever infrastructure the world provided, which in these places is infrastructure that is genuinely, chronically, structurally insufficient for the work it is doing. Understanding that is the beginning of understanding what these roads actually are. The Amazon basin of Peru is approximately 750,000 square kilometers of the most productive and biologically complex ecosystem on Earth. It receives several meters of rain per year. Its rivers swell seasonally to widths that dwarf the roads that attempt to parallel them. Its soil, which the rain saturates and the forest roots hold in place in the forest, becomes something closer to paste in the cleared corridors where roads run. The roads that connect Andean cities to Amazonian communities cross both the altitude and the ecology simultaneously. They descend from the Andean passes at over 4,000 meters to the basin floor near sea level, traversing the full range of climate and geology in a single journey. At the passes, the thin air and the cold and the rocky terrain produce one set of conditions. At the basin floor, the heat and the humidity and the mud produce another. The road that manages both is not a road that can be designed for uniform conditions, because the conditions are not uniform. Most of the roads are dirt. Not unsealed in the British sense, not gravel tracks that are passable in a standard vehicle, but dirt, compacted earth that Thephoryst's margin constantly attempts to reclaim. That the rain transforms seasonally into a surface where the distinction between road and ditch requires guesswork. That the heavy trucks carrying timber and minerals and agricultural products tear into ruts deep enough to swallow a wheel. The altitude creates a specific, mechanical problem. Air brake systems. The braking systems used on heavy trucks require compressed air to function. At 5,000 meters, the air is thin enough that compressors work harder to achieve the same pressure. And the braking performance that the driver relies on at sea level isn't the braking performance available at altitude. A truck that has descended from the Andes with a load of several tons On a dirt road with ruts and gradient, with braking performance reduced by altitude. On a schedule that does not permit the kind of caution that the conditions warrant. This is the standard operating condition of Amazonian freight transport. Not the exceptional case. Landslides block the roads for hours and days. This is not unusual. During the rainy season, a road that was passable in the morning may not be passable in the afternoon. The drivers who run these routes carry equipment for the contingency. That is not a contingency, but a regular feature of the work. Shovels, tow ropes. The phone numbers of the other drivers ahead. Who can report what the road is doing? The people who live in the communities at the end of these roads did not choose to live at the end of a road that operates like this. The road arrived, if it arrived, after the community was already there. Built to the standard that the available resources permitted, and maintained to the standard of what a road authority with those resources can maintain. Across thousands of kilometers of Amazon basin, what they have is what they have. The Chin Hills occupy the western edge of Myanmar, bordered by India to the north and Bangladesh to the west, separated from the rest of Myanmar ranges that run roughly north-south and reach over 3,000 meters in the highest sections. The Chin people who live in these hills are connected to the lowland Myanmar road network by roads that the terrain of the hills imposes, narrow, unpaved. Subject to the monsoon that the Bay of Bengal delivers annually to this coastward-facing range with particular intensity. The monsoon season runs from June to September. During these months, the roads are not closed. The communities that depend on them cannot afford for them to be closed, but the conditions they present change fundamentally. Dirt roads become mud roads. Mud roads become sequences of obstacles, each one requiring a specific negotiation. The deep rut that can be straddled. The soft section that requires momentum maintained carefully through it. The stream crossing that has deepened since the last vehicle passed and whose depth must be walked before the vehicle can follow. The rivers and streams of the Chin Hills are fed by the same rainfall that degrades the roads. A stream that was knee-deep in the morning may be waist-deep by afternoon after rain on the watershed above. The crossing that is assessed as possible in the morning is not necessarily possible in the afternoon. The drivers who work these routes carry the knowledge of the crossings and the knowledge of what the previous day's rainfall implies for the current day's crossing depths. They are correct most of the time. When they are not, the vehicle stops at the crossing and the assessment begins again. The concept of a journey time between 2 points in the Chin Hills during monsoon season is a range rather than an estimate. The range can span an entire day. This is not a failure of planning. It is an accurate description of what the road provides. The Niger Delta produces oil. The oil moves to refineries that are, in many cases, not functioning at capacity. The fuel that the population needs, the fuel for generators in a country where grid electricity is intermittent, the fuel for the motorcycles and vehicles that carry people and goods through. A road network that is itself inadequate must be transported from where it is available to where it is needed. In the communities of the Niger Delta and the surrounding region, where the official distribution infrastructure does not reach or does not function reliably, the transport of fuel becomes a local industry. The vehicles are what is available, motorcycles, their original cargo capacity supplemented by containers that exceed the design weight. The loads are measured in hundreds of liters. The trails are the trails of the region, narrow, unpaved, running through terrain phases simultaneously. the source of Nigeria's oil wealth and the location of communities that do not consistently benefit from it. The specific danger of this transport is not the terrain, though the terrain is difficult. It is the cargo. 700 liters of gasoline carried on a motorcycle through terrain that includes ruts and roots, and the exhaust heat of the engine beneath the load represents a mobile fire hazard of specific and calculable magnitude. The men who do this work know the calculation. The reason they do the work despite knowing it is that the economic return in a region where alternative income is not reliably available is sufficient to make the calculation worth making. They carry their loads through trails that are also used by communities who have no other transport option. The trails are narrow. The loads are wide. Theme counter of a loaded fuel motorcycle with oncoming traffic on a trail that does not have the width to accommodate both simultaneously is a logistical problem that is resolved the way logistical problems on narrow trails are always resolved. Someone reverses, someone pulls aside, someone dismounts and walks the vehicle past. The work continues because the need continues. The need continues because the official infrastructure that would make this form of transport unnecessary does not function reliably enough to replace it. The Dulong River Valley is one of the most isolated inhabited valleys in China. The valley runs roughly north-south along the Dulong River in the far northwest of Yunnan Province, bordered to the west by Myanmar, bounded on all sides by mountain ranges that exceed 3,000 meters. The Nanga Highway, the Dragon Road, is the only motorized connection between the Dulong Valley and the outside world. Before it existed, the valley was accessible only over mountain passes that were closed under snow for approximately half the year, leaving the Drung people who live there in complete logistical isolation for months at a time. The road that exists was built over decades of incremental construction and improvement. With the resources and technology available to a remote government project in one of China's least accessible regions, the tunnel through the Gaoligong mountain range, the critical section that allows the road to function year-round, rather than only in the months when the mountain passes are open, was begun in the 1980s and was not completed and properly lined for years. In its incomplete state, the tunnel was used because the alternative was no access at all. A dark, wet passage through unstable rock, with water seeping through the unlined sections, and the rock above showing the character of rock that has not been stabilized, landslides. On the approach roads are not seasonal events in the sense of being predictable. The mountains above the valley are steep and the rainfall is heavy, and the forest that holds the slopes in place is interrupted by the road corridor. When a slope gives way, the material arrives on the road without warning. The drivers who work the valley know the sections where slides are most frequent and know the time after heavy rain when the risk is highest. And they factor this into the rhythm of their work in the way that people who work in a specific environment accumulate knowledge of that environment's behavior. The government has invested significantly in the Dulong Valley Road in recent years. Sections that were dirt are now paved. The tunnel has been improved. The community, which was genuinely isolated for half of each year for generations, now has year-round access. What it has now is the result of what it had before being the baseline. The improvements are measured against the isolation, which was absolute. The road between Lubumbashi and the Zambian border at Kasumbalesa carries the copper and cobalt of the Katanga mining region to the ports and markets of southern Africa. Katanga province produces approximately half of the world's cobalt, the mineral that is in the battery of the phone you are holding. In the battery of the electric vehicle that represents the future of transport. In the supply chain of every technology company that uses rechargeable storage. The road that carries this cobalt from the mines to the border is not the road that supply chain implies. It is a red dirt road, laterite surface, that the rains of the wet season transform into a substance that is not quite mud and not quite road, and that can hold a 40-ton truck axle deep for 2 weeks. The trucks are always overloaded. The load limits that exist are not consistently enforced in conditions where the economic pressure to move material is higher than the economic pressure to comply with load limits. And the road bears the consequence. Each overloaded truck distributes its weight across a surface that wasn't designed for that weight, in conditions that the surface was not designed to handle. And the surface responds by failing progressively faster than a properly surfaced road would fail. The other traffic on this road, the motorcycles, the pedestrians, the old minibuses navigates around the trucks and between them in the space that the trucks passage and the road's surface leave available. The space is not always adequate for this navigation. The consequences of miscalculation on a road where the surface is inconsistent and the traffic includes 40-ton vehicles moving through mud at angles that the original direction of travel did not anticipate are the consequences of roads where the traffic exceeds the design in every relevant dimension. This is the road that the world's cobalt supply moves on. The Yungas Road was built in the 1930s by Paraguayan prisoners of war, put to work by the Bolivian government, on a route that the geography of the Andes made dangerous to build and has made dangerous to use ever since. The road descends from La Paz at approximately 3,600 meters to Coroico at approximately 1,200 meters, a descent of 2,400 meters over roughly 64 kilometers, through terrain where the eastern slopes of the Andes receive the full moisture of the Amazon basin winds and produce the dense cloud forest that makes the road simultaneously spectacular and treacherous. The moisture is constant. The fog that forms when warm Amazon air meets the cold of the Andean altitude sits on the road for hours in the morning and returns in the evening. Driving through it means driving at reduced speed through reduced visibility on a road where the margin for error is already minimal. The road is 3 to 4 meters wide. The cliff drops on the valley side are several hundred meters. The road was built wide enough for the traffic of its era, which was the traffic of a road to a small highland town in the 1930s, the traffic it subsequently carried as Coroico grew, as the Amazon region developed, as trucks carrying freight for the northern lowlands used the route, because it was the route, was not the traffic of its era. The crosses along the road are real. They were placed by families who came back to the locations where someone did not survive, and they have accumulated over decades of use until there are enough of them that they function as a continuous record of the road's cost. They are not removed when the dry season comes and the road is at its safest. They are permanent. A bypass was completed in 2006. The new road is safer, wider, and used by most commercial traffic. The Yungas Road now serves primarily as a mountain biking destination, the same gradient and the same scenery, without most of the vehicle traffic that made it lethal. Managed as an extreme sport rather than a daily commute, the crosses remain. They mark what the road was before the bypass and what it cost. Gabon sits on the equator. This geographic fact determines the road conditions as thoroughly as any engineering decision. The equatorial location provides rainfall distributed throughout the year with no genuine dry season. It is either raining or recently rained, with the implications for unpaved red laterite roads that this implies. The density of the equatorial forest that covers approximately 80% of the country provides the shade that keeps the road surface from drying between rains. Thelyderite soil itself, the iron and aluminum rich. Tropical soil that is the surface material of most sub-Saharan forest roads behaves differently from the temperate soils on which most road engineering assumptions are based. It is hard when dry, workable when slightly moist, and becomes an adhesive paste of extraordinary holding power when saturated. The timber industry provides much of Gabon's export revenue. The trucks that move that timber from the forest concessions to the ports and processing facility Estravel, on roads built to the standard that logging road construction provides, which is adequate for a certain volume of logging traffic under reasonable conditions, and not adequate for the volume and weight that an active concession generates under the conditions that the equatorial climate routinely provides. 40-ton logging truck is a vehicle of specific dimensions and weight distribution. When it encounters a section of saturated laterite road, the weight it distributes per tire is beyond what that surface can maintain structural integrity under. The truck sinks. The sinking process is not catastrophic. It is gradual, measurable in centimeters per minute, and the experienced driver can feel it happening and must make a judgment about whether to maintain momentum through the section or to stop. Stopping in a saturated section commits the vehicle to that position until conditions change or until the recovery equipment arrives. The recovery equipment may take days to arrive. The section may remain saturated for the duration. The other traffic, the vehicles that are not logging trucks, the motorcycles and minibuses, and the occasional passenger car that uses the same road because it is the road, navigates around the stuck trucks and through the ruts the trucks have created. In the sections where the trucks are not stuck, the road status available to lighter vehicles after heavy trucks have passed through saturated laterite is not the road that was available before. Gabon's roads do not reward urgency. They reward patience and the willingness to wait for conditions that never fully arrive. The Autopista del Sol connects Mexico City to Acapulco. The name Sun Highway suggests the kind of infrastructure that connects a capital to a coastal resort. Smooth, modern, well-maintained. The highway was that when it was built. The sections through the Sierra Madre del Sur, where the road descends from the high central plateau to the Pacific coast, were built with the engineering that the gradient and the terrain required. La Pera section, named for the pear shape of the curve, visible from above, is the section where the descent is most compressed and the hairpin geometry most demanding. The sinkhole problem is not a traditional road danger. It is a geological event. The clay soils of the Sierra Madre region, saturated by tropical rains, can lose a cohesion rapidly and collapse under load, creating sudden voids that are not predictable from the road surface above them. The accident that killed a father and son when their vehicle entered an 8-meter sinkhole on this road was not caused by driver error or road surface degradation visible before entry. The road surface appeared normal. The ground beneath it was not. The enforcement situation compounds the physical danger with a human one. In multiple Mexican states, a driver's license is available without the practical examination that licenses in most countries require. The theoretical knowledge of road behavior and hazard response that the examination is designed to verify is therefore not consistently present in the driver population. A road with sinkholes and steep descent and limited guardrails, used by drivers who have not consistently demonstrated the knowledge that the road requires. This is the condition of the Autopista del Sol. On its difficult sections, the road is tolled. The toll revenue is intended, in part, for maintenance. The state of the road reflects the relationship between that intention and its execution. The Salang Pass is the only land route connecting Kabul to northern Afghanistan. This geographic fact, the fact that there is no alternative route, that the populations of Kabul and the northern provinces are connected by a single road, corridor through a single mountain pass, gives the Salang strategic significance that has made it a target in every conflict that Afghanistan has experienced since it was built. It has been bombed, rocketed, blocked, and destroyed and rebuilt. And it continues to carry the traffic that the northern provinces require because the alternative to it operating is those provinces being cut off entirely. The Salang Tunnel, built with Soviet assistance in 1964, runs 2.67 kilometers through the Salang Pass at approximately 3,363 meters. It was the highest road tunnel in the world at the time of its construction. The ventilation system that was designed to manage the exhaust gases of the vehicles using it was damaging. The conflicts of the 1980s and subsequent decades and has not been fully restored to its original specification. The result is that the tunnel's air quality, under high traffic volume, particularly under the diesel exhaust of the heavy trucks that use it as the primary freight route between Kabul and Thenarth, is below the standards that tunnel ventilation is designed to maintain. In the winter of 1982, an accident in the Salang Tunnel, the specific sequence of events is still debated, but involved vehicles stopping and fires starting in the tunnel in the absence of adequate ventilation, killed several hundred people. The exact number varies by source, from the low hundreds to estimates above 1,000. It is among the most lethal tunnel accidents in history. The tunnel continues to operate. The traffic of the country's logistics requires it to operate. The ventilation improvements that would reduce the risk are in a country where infrastructure investment competes with every other priority that Afghanistan carries. Above the tunnel, the pass itself, at 3,800 meters, the open road crosses terrain where avalanches are winter events rather than exceptional hazards, where the temperature and snowfall can close the road for days when the tunnel is the only option, and where the road surface reflects the maintenance history of a pass that has been a military objective and a logistical artery simultaneously for decades. It is still the only road. The Peruvian Andes are not a single mountain range. They are a system of ranges: the Cordillera Occidental, the Cordillera Central, the Cordillera Oriental, running roughly parallel north to south and separated by deep valleys that the rivers have cut over geological time. The roads that connect the communities of these ranges to each other and to the Pacific coast and to the Amazon basin must cross these ranges, which means they must climb from one valley to the next over passes that reach, in many cases, above 4,000 meters, with the gradients that the ridge heights and the valley depths between them impose. The geometry is not the only challenge. The altitude creates physiological conditions that are relevant to drivers. At 4,500 meters, the air contains approximately 60% of the oxygen at sea level. Altitude sickness, the syndrome of headache, nausea, impaired judgment, and in severe cases incapacitation, is not a risk at this altitude for unacclimatized travelers. It is a probability. The speed of onset varies between individuals, but the descent in cognitive performance that accompanies altitude exposure is measurable and relevant to the specific cognitive task of driving a vehicle on a road with no barriers at high gradient. The vehicles on these roads include everything from buses, the intercity buses that connect Andean towns, running routes that would be declined by any operator with access to better road infrastructure, to the fully loaded trucks carrying the agricultural products of the high valleys to the lowland markets. The buses run their schedules. The trucks run their loads. The road accommodates them on the surface that it provides, which is in many cases the road surface of initial construction in the 1970s or 1980s, maintained to the standard of what the local government's road maintenance budget supports. The hairpin bends at altitude, without barriers on the outside edge of a ridge that drops several hundred meters, are driven daily by drivers who know the road and weekly by drivers who do not. The ones who know the road know where the bad sections are. The ones who do not learn progressively, section by section, which is the correct way to learn a road with these characteristics, but not the safest way for any specific unfamiliar section. Nanga Parbat, the 9th highest mountain on Earth, the westernmost of the Himalayan 8,000ers, known by the climbers who have attempted it as Killer Mountain, not as a romantic title but as an actuarial one, based on the death rate on its routes, which historically exceeded that of every other peak of comparable height. The road to Fairy Meadows, from which the mountain is accessible, is 15 kilometers long and begins at Reykjavik Bridge on the Karnali Highway. It is classified as a road rather than a trail because vehicles, specifically modified Jeeps of 1970s vintage, can use it under the right conditions. The surface is rock and compressed earth. The width in the narrowest sections is literally the width of the Jeep with very little additional margin. The altitude gain from the Karnali Highway to Fairy Meadows is approximately 2,100 meters in 15 kilometers. The Jeeps that work this road are not standard vehicles. They have been modified for the specific demands of this route: higher suspension, modified gearing for extended low-speed climbing, radiator systems capable of managing the engine temperatures that prolonged low-gear climbing at altitude produces. The drivers who work the road know it as a piece of equipment that must be managed rather than a road that can be driven. They know the sections where the surface is loosened, the correct line through them. They know the sections where the width is absolute and the correct positioning to maintain it. The overheating issue is practical and consistent. The extended low-gear climbing at altitude that the gradient requires generates heat in the engine that the cooling system must manage without the airflow that highway speed provides. The drivers stop to add water to the cooling system at points they have identified from experience as the intervals at which the system requires it. This is maintenance performed on the road, under driving conditions, as a routine element of the journey rather than as an emergency response. At the top, Nanga Parbat fills the sky. The mountain is enormous in the way that only the largest things can be. Enormous, a scale that the eye cannot fully process because the frame of reference that everyday experience provides is simply insufficient for the task. The road, which was difficult in ways that were immeasurable and specific, has delivered you to something that is not. The RN5 runs along the eastern coast of Madagascar from Tomasina, the country's main port, southward through the littoral zone. Between the Indian Ocean and the eastern escarpment, the eastern coast of Madagascar receives over 3,000 millimeters of rain per year, distributed with the specific temporal character of a climate influenced by Indian Ocean cyclones, long periods of heavy rain. Cyclone seasons that arrive with predictability, but whose severity varies. And the accumulated effect of this rainfall on a laterite soil surface that has the same adhesive properties under saturation that the Gaboon roads demonstrate. The road has always been difficult. The combination of the ocean, the forest, and the rainfall that the geography produces has always made a maintained surface in this corridor expensive relative to what the traffic volume and the available maintenance budget can sustain. But the specific difficulty that the RN5 presents now is also a function of cyclone damage, events in which the road was not merely degraded, but destroyed in sections, with bridges taken out and surfaces eroded down to the underlying rock, and with reconstruction funded to the level that the reconstruction budget permitted rather than to the level that would restore the original standard, the sections close to the sea, where the road runs across sand, where the fine coastal sand that accumulates on the road surface reduces the traction that the surface provides, and can cause a vehicle to lose forward momentum in ways that sand driving experience is needed to manage, are the sections that distinguish RN5 from roads that are merely rough. The unpredictability of the surface type, moving between saturated laterite, exposed rock, and coastal sand in short intervals, requires continuous adaptation that a single surface road does not. The communities that the RN5 serves are coastal fishing villages and agricultural settlements that depend on the road for their connection to the port and the market in Tomasina. The road that exists is the road they have. The Karnali River has carved one of the deepest gorges in Nepal. The river drains the western Himalayas and the high plateau of the Karnali Zone, one of the most remote and least developed regions in Nepal, a country where regional development has historically concentrated on the central and eastern hills that are closer to Kathmandu. The Karnali Highway connects this zone to the lowland, Terai, 300 kilometers from Circuit at 700 meters to Jumla at approximately 2,370 meters. Through gorge terrain that the river's cutting over millions of years has made what it is. The road follows the river, which means it follows the gorge, which means it follows a surface that the gorge walls provide, rock outcroppings, landslide deposits, sections where the road is cut into the cliff face and sections where it runs across the floodplain at river level. The width is determined by what the gorge floor and walls provide, which in many sections is barely enough for a jeep. The surface is the surface of the gorge, rock and gravel and the material that arrives from above, maintained to the standard of what can be maintained with the equipment accessible to a region. With the Karnali Zone's resources, the journey of 300 kilometers takes up to 5 days. This number requires pause. 5 days for 300 kilometers is a speed of 60 kilometers per day, which is approximately 8 kilometers per hour, slower than a bicycle on flat terrain. The road does not support bicycle speeds. It supports the speed that this terrain and this surface impose on vehicles that are attempting to move through it, which is the speed of the road. The Karnali Zone has been designated as one of Nepal's special development areas, with specific investment programs directed at its infrastructure. The highway that exists now is better than the highway that existed before the programs. The highway that existed before was the baseline. Papua New Guinea contains, within its approximately 460,000 square kilometers, some of the world's most rugged terrain and some of the world's most biologically diverse ecosystems. The highland interior, the central ranges, that run roughly east-west across the island, rises to above 4,000 meters and receives rainfall at the altitude and the tropical positioning combine to produce in quantities that the road infrastructure of the Purka region must manage continuously. The road that goes straight uphill is the actual description of highland Papua New Guinea road geometry. The mountainous terrain does not offer the long switchback alignments that allow a road to gain altitude gradually. It offers the direct line upward, and the roads follow the direct line upward with gradients that a four-wheel drive vehicle at low range can manage and that a two-wheel drive vehicle cannot. The rainfall that 15 minutes of tropical rain produces, the specific intensity of equatorial rainfall, which is not the light or moderate rain of temperate climates, but the kind of rainfall that visually obscures a windscreen at low vehicle speeds, transforms the red dirt road surface into the substance that is available for vehicle passage. The substance is approximately what it sounds like, wet red dirt, with the adhesive properties that wet fine soil produces, and with the drainage characteristics that a road surface without engineering drainage produces. The vehicle either has the momentum to maintain passage through it, or it does not. If it does not, the vehicle stops and the process of recovery begins. The bridges are wood and bamboo in many sections, not as a decorative choice, but as the materials available for construction of bridge structures in locations where concrete and steel must be transported on the same roads that the bridges are intended to support. A bridge built from materials transported over road that destroys vehicles is built from materials that can be carried without vehicles, timber from the surrounding forest, bamboo from the valleys below. Each bridge crossing is a weight assessment that the driver performs. Is this structure adequate for this vehicle at this load on this day after this recent rainfall? The answer is usually yes. It is not always yes. The roads reflect the country. The country is not defined by its roads, but the roads tell you a great deal about what has been possible here, and what has not, and why these roads do not end here, that they continue tomorrow morning, carrying the traffic that they have always carried, the trucks with the copper and the cobalt, the motorcycles with the fuel, the buses with the people who have no other option, the jeeps with the tourists who came to see the mountain, and will go home to roads that do not work like this. The difference between the roads on this list and the roads in the countries where most of the people watching this were built is not primarily a difference of geography. The Andes and the Himalayas and the Congo Basin have geography that creates difficult roads. But so does Norway, which built the Trollstigen into a national tourist route. So does Switzerland, which tunneled through the Alps for 16 years. So does Scotland, which built a rotating boat lift to connect two canals. The difference is what was available to invest in the infrastructure that geography required. And the difference in what was available to invest is the story of how resources moved in the world, from the colonial era to the present, and where they accumulated, and where they did not. The roads on this list are the roads of Places where they did not. That understanding that does not make the roads less dangerous, but it makes them comprehensible in a way that makes the people who use them daily visible as something other than people who chose a difficult drive. They did not choose it. The road chose them. And they use it because it is the road they have.